Hey everybody, welcome to DVS Films Podcast. My name is Kellen, and with me as always is my brother Brendan, and together we make movies with DVS Films. Today we're going to be hopping into part 2 of The Devil in the Room. We're going to talk about what it's like to be on set, how you can work with actors on an indie production, and basically what happened. Again, along with The Haunting of the Morgan Estate, this is one of those movies that got caught up in post-production, and typically that happens when you just have some unforeseen issues on production. So we're going to hop into that. But before we do, just want to go ahead and mention that our film, The Girl in Cabin 13, is still now free on Tubi. So if you haven't seen it yet and you want to go ahead and watch our newest and in our personal opinion, best movie, you can go ahead and do that for free on Tubi platform. Also, if you want to learn more about us, be sure to follow us on Instagram. We have a Discord page and all of those fun things. So, we always say in this podcast, when it comes down to it, the production is always, a compromise of what you can possibly get done. You have your idea, you get to production, you can film what you can film, and then you get done. Now, as we mentioned in part 1, we weren't really as on solid ground when it comes to the screenplay. So when you have that, you're already kind of leaving a lot of variables up in the production element. But with that being said, we really did, in my opinion, end up having some of the same production issues, mainly using the dual cam, having issues with that syncing up, using a boom, having audio issues to some degree. So, real quick, I just want to highlight again, what's kind of the benefit that you get? Had we finished Morgan Estate, how do you think The Devil in the Room would have been different versus us jumping right from completing the Morgan Estate, knowing we had a product that wasn't quite there, and then going immediately into The Devil in the Room?
Well, I think that the Morgan Estate and The Devil in the Room suffered from the same issues, which were a lot of heavy dialogue scenes, a lot of character development that was just unnecessary. So when we make horror movies, the most important thing for us is, properly pacing the movie, making sure that people start watching the movie and they finish the movie. And, when we did the found footage movies, a lot of the feedback we got was, hey, we want to know more about your characters. We want to see more character depth, which is great. And obviously movies need to have that, but you have to make sure that you're walking a fine line between making sure you still have proper pacing and making sure that you're not boring the audience with just over dramatic scenes and over dramatic acting and just a ton of drama stuff when your key audience is looking for a horror film. And I think that the Morgan Estate had a lot of heavy dialogue scenes that just really slowed it down. But I think we were able to essentially cut them down and edit a lot of that stuff out. I think the difference between the Morgan Estate and The Devil in the Room was we weren't able to really cut those scenes down in The Devil in the Room. And that really messed with the pacing and just gave this movie more of like a character development movie, or something that like A24 would put out, where it's very like heavy character drama movie, which is like hints of horror. So I think if we would have had both of these movies done, or if we would have had the Morgan Estate done, we would have learned from that and like, all right, look, we went too far in the other direction as far as like long scenes of dialogue and too much character development, especially if you're telling instead of showing. And I would have cut a lot of that stuff out with the Devil in the Room. So it's definitely important to get the movies completed, or if you can't even complete them, just get them to a point where you can get proper feedback from them, which is like where we are with the last movie that we did. Murder House is not completed yet, but I've been showing it to so many people. I've been showing it to distribution companies, family, friends, and I have enough, feedback to essentially start another movie and know how to avoid the mistakes that we made in the Murder House movie.
Yeah, and again, the difference between filming and completing it experience-wise really is almost like tenfold. I think one of the other elements that we had, and we'll kind of go into a little bit more deeper of it, is this was one where I was back on set, so I was able to do the consistent editing as we were going, and we'll explain later on in this episode how that can save you, because I do think while it was still, we needed to give it a good amount of love to get it over the line, it wasn't quite as many missing spots as we saw with The Haunting of the Morgan Estate. simply because we were able on set to say, hey, Brendan, we need to get this, we need to get this shot, we need to get that shot before we leave. So that was something there. Really what I want to start off now is just talking about as an indie film producer, director, what it's like to kind of work with actors and just kind of what you can do to really help you set up for the most success and some things that we know. Because this was something where, it's our 8th film, and we actually had a few moments on set where me and my brother looked at each other and were like, we're going through this phase again. The actors are at this level, they're about to get tired, they're about to burn out. So we started to really recognize and then started to, work with the actors. Now, again, everyone who's worked with us has been absolutely fantastic. Anytime you end up with the finished product, you really end up having a great team as the testament to getting it done. So it's more so the nature of filmmaking being incredibly tough and difficult to do. And you're just going to run into issues like this. So, when it comes to acting and whatnot, what's kind of your overall approach, just to kind of, actually, here's a good place to start. Let's talk about the bell curve that we see with acting, where multiple shoots now, we see how when they start off, they're going to be a little bit cold or rusty, not even cold and rusty. It's just, you're on a new set with new people, you get into your peak and prime, and then you kind of get burnt out from the whole production because it's tough. So do you want to talk about that bell curve and what you should be doing or looking for as an indie producer or director on set?
Yeah, for like the bell curve, the first, couple days, or really the first day, you're just everyone's excited, everyone's nervous. I'm nervous. We have a pretty big crew, we have 2 cameras, and it's super intimidating for even seasoned actors because you're essentially coming on set, you're meeting people for the first time because we don't have, a ton of pre-production days. And I'm asking you to, all right, get in front of these 2 cameras that are $15,000 a piece. They have these huge lenses. And I'm like, all right, ready and go. And I don't care how seasoned you are, you're going to be nervous and it's going to be rough. And, it's hard to get started. But usually I find, especially with more seasoned actors, after like an hour or 2 of shooting and starting to run through stuff, they start to just relax a little bit. And then usually the next 2 or 3 days are going to be your best acting days because they're getting into a groove, they're getting used to it. We move very, very fast, so there's not a lot of downtime. My main, goal as a director is to really just find the momentum, find when the actors are doing their best work, and then just push them as far as they can go until they start to get tired. Because if you can keep that momentum and keep it going all the way through set, there's a lot of good energy in there, and you don't need to have them hit highs and then, take a break and then they have to restart. The bottom half of the bell curve comes in, as people get tired. And I always have like a big disclaimer when I'm talking to the actors, I'm like, hey guys, we're gonna do this for 8 days. This is gonna be 8-day shoot. You're gonna be working, 12 to 14 hours. And everyone's like, yeah, that's fine. That's not a problem at all. A lot of people just underestimate how difficult it is to work 12 to 14-hour days and give something your all. So they're being pushed physically, they're being pushed mentally, and they're being pushed emotionally as well. And that all requires a ton of energy. So unless you've been doing this for a long time, and even the actors that we had that had a lot of experience, it's just a very difficult shoot. We're shooting 12 pages a day as opposed to 1 or 2 that most production sets do. So I'm asking a lot of the actors, and if you're going to do an indie film and you're going to shoot it under 15 days, just be aware that your last 2 or 3 days are just going to be physically and mentally tired. So you really don't want to save the climax or big scenes to the end, because you have a higher risk of frustration at this point. You have a higher risk of just mental breakdown. So you just really want to make sure that most of your heavy stuff happens in the middle of that bell curve, and then start to save the easier stuff to the end. Because I also think that helps with morale, because if the hard stuff's done and you're crossing off a list and you're like, listen, we only have easier stuff to do, let's just knock this stuff out and be done with this shoot. I think it gives them a little bit motivation to stay in it, knowing that the hardest part is already being completed, and it's just downhill from there.
Yeah, it really is. Now we're very strategic with what scenes we film when, and we really do mold it to that bell curve. Our first scenes are typically lighter ones. A lot of like character developed intros. So, like, not the actual intro itself, but if you watch all of our movies, as soon as you basically see the intro, there's typically a scene in The Haunting of the Murder House. This scene was us in a U-Haul van. But more specifically, one of the first scenes we ever did was when the group was just out in front of the house walking around, flashlights, and then talking to each other. And we actually even went back and decided to refilm it just because we're like, hey, we can do better. But basic scenes where they're moving and having light dialogue is really great to them to get used to each other. Because another thing, if you haven't been acting and you're acting with a group of people, it's always something where it's almost like a game of hot potato, where if you screw up, then my brother's like, cut, everyone stops, everyone has to go back. And I don't care who you are, you're going to feel bad about yourself. So if you're kind of nervous already, and then you're not really comfortable around people, and you end up screwing up the line, then you might be a little bit more harsh on yourself. You might get in your head, and realistically, you want to get them out of that point as much as possible. Then, the most important parts, the climax and the actual intro, those are the days, you really want to work with them in their prime. And as I mentioned earlier, we now have a really good idea when people are essentially breaking, is what we call it. And again, it's something that's going to happen. It is a ton of work. I mean, like, you're basically going delusional. You're hopped up on caffeine. It's a tough job, and it will happen to pretty much everyone. But a good sign for that is when everyone gets like really, really like happy and loud and singing on set, and it's like 2 or 3 in the morning, and they're just almost kind of really goofy, kind of like almost like a kid's slumber party is what I would kind of almost akin it to. But I remember on this scene, or on this set, it was like 2, 3 in the morning. They were talking about it. And this was literally when me and my brother looked at each other and were like, we have 2 hours. Like, we literally have 2 hours from this point in time where they spend the last thing in the gas can, and then they're just out. And that's just, how it is. So as a producer and a director, you really have to understand how important your actors are. All of the actors that we've had have always, been able to finish the product with us, but there's multiple occasions, even on Hollywood budgets, sets, of people just walking off and being done with it. So, on your indie film that doesn't even have anywhere near that clout or anything there, I'm sure it happens all the time. So really trying to manage that idea of what your set is going to be like and making them happy as much as possible is just going to be a benefit to it. So, with that being said, we had fantastic team here. Our production assistant, she was able to work with her friends, and we had a couple, Sky and Isaac. They're absolutely amazing and fantastic job in it. And it's always good when you do have a couple, because you kind of get a chemistry to it. I think what I do want to dive into now is kind of the best way to set up a pre-production. Walk us through the process that you have of just working with the actors now, getting them set up. I know this one was a little bit different, but what's your advice to an indie filmmaker just on how to, confirm with the actor, get them on the same schedule, get them in the mindset of ready to be, good to go when they land on day one?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I've learned doing all these movies is how important pre-production is, because as an indie filmmaker, time's going to be your biggest asset, and usually you're not going to have a lot of time on set. So I think a lot of people will get advice or start to look at what Hollywood directors do, and I'll use like David Fincher as an example. He'll run through a scene 30 to 60 times, and he could really sit there and work with the actors and get, a ton of takes and a ton of different variations. And he sits down and he has this ability to do all this stuff on set. You don't have that ability on an indie set. So really the most important thing for me, once again, is to capture the momentum and try and keep the actors happy and keep them going through all this stuff. You don't have time to really give them a ton of direction, because you're only going to slow down the set. And there's always that time pressure element of an indie shoot. And if you give them too much direction, they're going to start to, fight back a little bit. Everyone's going to get frustrated. The other actors are going to get frustrated. So really An indie director is like, I'm trying to make sure they're staying in the lines of what the script is trying to say. I'm trying to give them a little bit of freedom with improv, but most important, I'm trying to get them to a place where they're comfortable and they're good at working with each other and we have momentum. And I'm just going to try and push them as long as they can go before they start getting tired. If you sit there and you try and give them a ton of direction or try and change a whole bunch of things or try and make last minute changes, you're not going to get your movie done and you're going to piss a lot of people off. So for pre-production, I go through right now, I go through the script about 3 times. I do one top-down level meeting with them and just discuss the character from a top-down level. And I go through the script and get their feedback on certain things, what they like, what they don't like. And so here's a trick. They're never going to tell you, like, they'll never really give you feedback. You really have to have a lot of questions ready to go, and you have to kind of pull it out of them because these actors are shy. They don't really know you. They don't know if you're going to get upset with a lot of things. So I almost put myself and I'm like, I don't really like this one, or I don't really like this line. What do you think? And then they'll give me their honest feedback on it. Or I'll just say like, I'm looking for different variations, give me some examples. And actors love this because if they see that you're working with them, that they're collaborating with you, they have more invested in the project at this time. So the first meeting is top down stuff. The second one, like, I'll take their feedback from the first meeting and I'll start changing the dialogue or I'll start adding different scenes in there based on their feedback or their ideas. And I'll start to write the dialogue. The second meeting is I'll read with them to go through the dialogue. And I'm looking for specific areas where it's difficult. The dialogue's just difficult. It's long, it's lengthy, the cadence is off. They're just having a hard time saying these lines. And I'll make note of that to clean it up. Then the third one is usually the table read, where they get to read with everyone else and they get to meet everyone else on the team. And then I'm not a huge fan of table reads because I just don't think they're all that much of a benefit. They help me a little bit because once again, I could find different lines that people are struggling with. But for the most part, you're not going to get like a super accurate performance from them because they're just excited to be, at a table read. They're excited with all the other people around them. I find that working with them one-on-one is just a much better environment. But table reads are super important just to get the chemistry with the other actors and get them comfortable with the other actors. So I think your pre-production at a minimum should have these 3 things, because once again, when you're on set, the actors and you have to be completely aligned on the vision of the film, and they have to be comfortable with the dialogue. There should be no questions or heavy comments, or you shouldn't be changing the dialogue a lot while you're on set. It's just going to be bad for everybody. And, there's a little bit on the actors too. They should also make sure that they're comfortable with the dialogue. And if they have any changes, it should be brought up in the pre-production part of the script. Don't wait. If you're an actor, don't wait to get on set to start bringing up issues with your dialogue or with some of the scenes that you're in, because that's going to be an issue as well. So really, it's just make sure you do pre-production. You put as much time into pre-production as you can. So both of you, the actors and the director, are on the same page, because time is so limited on these shoots that you just don't have time to really sit down and really work with the actors like you want to. And you don't have a lot of time to just change things on the fly, because it's just, you're going to start cutting shots then, and then you're going to just be racing against time.
I think that's a great point that you bring up. One thing I think we see a lot in the indie community is the mindset that this is a Hollywood, budget. As you mentioned with David Fincher, it's just one of those things where if you look at some of the greats and they're like, I have to work with an actor, break them down and mold them. You don't really have the time for that. You don't have the budget for that. And, those are usually the things. If I'm paying an actor, a lot of money, I get to do this in return. Whereas on an indie set, that's typically not the case. And you really want to make sure that you get them as involved as possible, because the more involved they are, the less likely they are to, essentially walk out if things go worse comes to worse. But the more they're going to give it their effort, the more they're going to understand the character, and the more they're going to be willing to work with you. And I think that's one of the biggest things. Like, you do have to be a people person on set, because you have to work all of these emotions, and you're pushing them again to their limits. There is that bell curve. And I think we do a very good job of making them feel welcome, making them feel comfortable, them having a good time. Usually by, day 2, 3, 4, we all have good jokes on it's just a smooth mix that we can put out there. So one of the reasons that we are able to do that is because we do ask for their input. We do mention, what does this feel like to you? It is a good way to spot where they're good or bad at the dialogue, because each person is different. So, they bring their own different flair to it. And even when we are on set, because of the pre-productions, they feel comfortable when they're acting and walking out through a scene to simply say, what about this line, or what about that? And we're like, sweet, let's go for it. Just because it's going to be more natural to them. So, those are definitely something that if you're in the indie film production, make sure you really do set yourself up with more so pre-production, in the sense of what's on the script, of just getting to know the person and knowing them better. I will say one thing, you're never going to find people who understand the script as much as you. And the reason for that is because typically, if you're the one that wrote it, or if you're the one producing it, how many times have we been through the script before the time it's the final, like 20, 30, 40, 50 times almost. Even if an actor reads it once, they're not really going to have the greatest understanding of it. And I would say that, as an indie film director, you almost need to kind of understand, if you don't actually put in the film or the pre-production, you might find that your actors or your talent actually hasn't really read too much of the script. Would you say it's common to see that most indie film producers overestimate just how much pre-production the actor is going to do on their own, simply because I think they live in their mindset?
Yeah, and I see it a lot with indie films, because the actors don't know what they're really getting into. They don't know if it's like a student production, or how much time they should really be, putting into it, if it's not going to get uploaded or not going to get finished. And that happens a lot. If you are an actor, though, I do love to see when I talk to actors, they have a ton of notes, and they have a ton of feedback, and they have a ton of questions, because it just makes my job a lot easier. But, from my experience, some do that, and some do a pretty good job. And those are usually the ones, we try and bring back. It just makes my job easier. But yeah, I would definitely say that's on you as a director to really flesh it out, and really, get this information out of them, and make sure you're doing proper pre-production, because you don't know like how much time they're going to be devoting to your script. You don't know if they're loaded with a whole bunch of other projects. You don't know how much time they're trying to commit to this script. So you really got to kind of hold their hand a little bit, and just make sure that, they understand what's going on. They're reading through the script multiple times, and you're asking questions that are beneficial. My experience has been, the actors actually provide the most valuable feedback on your script, because, as a screenplay writer, when I'm like working with Kel, what we'll do is we're looking at all the characters. I'm looking at the pacing. I'm looking at the characters. I'm looking at everybody. An actor is just focusing on their one character. So they can, focus in and really hone in on that one character, and they can really feel like, all right, is this motivation proper? Like, am I properly motivated at this point? What's like my fear level? Like, that's one thing that indie films suffer from, is like, how scared on a scale of 1 to 10 is that person as they're going through this horror movie? And there'll be some times where, like, in the beginning of the movie, stuff is a little bit scarier, and they're not reacting properly. So they can be like, hey, like, I think I'd be more scared here, or I wouldn't say this here, or I wouldn't, or I'd want to just leave at this point. So we have to like tone this down. So it's just, the actors will give you feedback dedicated to their one character. And that's some of the best feedback that you can get. I'm going through right now the actor pre-production for The Shapeshifter, and every single actor that I've talked to on this production has brought up absolutely great feedback. And we're making, strong revisions to the script based on the feedback that they're giving me. And overall, it's going to be a better script because, of the feedback and the notes and the time that these actors have taken to invest in pre-production. But as a director and really as a filmmaker, you have to be the driving force of everything that happens, from writing the script to directing the movie to editing the movie. You have to be the one, pushing, because people are just, they got a lot of things going on, and sometimes it's not in their best interest or their priority to work on a new script or your current project. So you really have to make sure that you're honing in on them and you're working with them and you're putting the time in to really get this script and your production where it needs to be.
Exactly. And I think, the best mentality you can have is almost expect them not to read the script, and you'll be pleasantly surprised, but then you'll do the pre-production to get them to that level. And again, there's multiple factors. I think when you have that mindset of the producer, like you said, you're looking at everything. You're like, well, yeah, this is everything. Well, it's everything to you, but these actors have multiple gigs. They have multiple things going on. So, like you're saying, if you're not the driving force in ensuring that, well, then you're going to, potentially set yourself up for a lot of issues, and these issues would play out on set. So with that, we're going to go ahead and jump into the start of the pre-production. Honestly, I would say my biggest critique of this movie is I think it just was a little bit big of a concept. Like you were saying, kind of felt like a character piece with a little bit of horror sprinkled in there. And to me, that's because we didn't really necessarily execute on the special effects. We had the introduction of Frank the Demon, who is me with a nice mask that we had made. So it's one of those things where, yeah, you have some elements to it, but really, if you want a sleep paralysis demon, you're gonna kind of have to go a little bit over, zealous, in my opinion, for the horror genre, versus what we do with something like Girl in Cabin 13 or the past movies we've done, which have been Possession. So then you just have the human character. So I think that kind of slows it down a little bit. But overall, production, I mean, we had an easy location that we had set up. So, going into this one, we really had the idea that as long as some of the issues that didn't come up, like the allergic reaction on set, that was just uncalled for with the insulation. But again, you can't think of those things. We should be set. So would you say moving into this production, you're, pretty confident that, hey, that was a fluke. Let's knock this one out of the park. And then bam, 5 movies filmed in 1 year.
Yeah. And I mean, I think one of the things that we learned from this movie, like in the previous podcast, I talked about not really wanting to make this movie, that I just felt unsure about it, but I pushed through. And no matter how you feel on a movie and just getting something done, you're going to learn from it. And we learned a lot from this movie. And I think this production, from start to finish, was our smoothest production. Now, we had one incident that really slowed us down, but for the most part, this one wrapped at a reasonable hour. The pacing was good all the way through it. We weren't really rushing. So I'd say this one is up there with found footage as far as the ease and smoothness of the shoots. And found footage is obviously very easy to edit and to shoot a cinematic movie and, have such a smooth production like we did on this one. It started to get the gears turning in my head on how to properly shoot a movie and how to, run an efficient set. I think we had some of it in the Morgan Estate. The Morgan Estate just had a lot of locations. This one had 2 locations. It had a house, and then it had my office again that we used. But for the most part, this one was very smooth. The production was good. I don't remember being super rushed at any point. Maybe like the last night we started to run a little bit at a time, but compared to a lot of the other stuff that we've done, this one was extremely, extremely smooth. And I think it was a stepping stone to the Girl in Cabin 13 and the sets moving forward on how we operate and, identifying the coverage that we need and just making sure everything is managed properly as far as like scheduling, making sure we have, we're not biting off too much as far as like shooting too many pages in one day.
Yeah, it really was a smoother shoot, and kind of attuned to the Morgan estate, really things were smooth until the end. And we'll hop into kind of one of the issues and what you might be able to do to avoid it in a little bit that popped up here, but that did delay us. So that did crunch up the time. We did finish this one. This was probably the only one that we did actually pop champagne on, but we had stayed up all night. So we stayed up all night. Sun came up, got some B-roll, pop champagne. But with that being said, when we had the movie, we still had to do pickups. So, it's not like we completely were done with everything, but we knew we had to do pickups. We were already saying, hey, we can pick this up, we can pick that up. And that just goes back to, it has to be a compromise. You have to understand, as your timetable shifts, as you continue to adjust your schedule, you're going to have to compromise in what shoots you're doing, what shots, and how to adjust from there. So, one thing that I think really stood out in the difference between the Morgan estate and the Devil in the Room was, again, the benefit of having myself on set editing and looking back at those. Because we actually did have a few scenes that during the review, we decided to say, hey, we need to go back and reshoot this, particularly like the cabinet scare, a few transition shots and things like that. So do you want to talk a little bit again about, what the benefits are there, and more importantly, how as a filmmaker you have to understand what's critical and what can be pushed off into a pickup, kind of like we did, because we were happy with where we were, but we knew we still had some more work to do.
Yeah, I think the difference between Morgan Estate and this movie was Morgan Estate was missing transition shots, but having Kel on set, we were making sure the movie flowed properly. That being said, we had one pop scare that was just, it was just not shot as well as it could have been, that we had to get, we had to pick up. And I still think that was like one of the pickups that we did later on. We kept trying to fix this one scene. And then I think we needed more to this one. So like the Morgan estate was like broken, as in there wasn't enough transitions. The movie didn't flow. This one flowed because Kel was there making sure it flowed. The issues with this one were we didn't have enough coverage to really edit the movie properly. So like, for example, the ending scene where she wakes up in the dream world to fight Frank was just missing a lot of stuff. Like all the smoke and all the red stuff in the bathroom with blood on it is all pickups, because we just needed more. But when I'm on set, I'm like, all right, well, we don't necessarily need the actress for this one, because we can do what we learned from the Morgan estate, going back to like how to do little tricks and tips. If we just had the actress's hand, we had to grab a knife. So we just needed her hand, we needed her foot. And we just needed Frank to run around in a house. So I knew that. I knew we could probably beef it up, so I wasn't too worried about that. And then we did pick up like the pop scare where Frank essentially pops out of a laundry room, which is actually one of our higher rated pop scares. But like going into it, I knew, because Kel was confirming what we were missing and what we weren't missing, I could kind of make a mental note of like, all right, well, if we can't get this, we could pick it up later. We know how to pick up stuff with hands and feet. And I know that one pop scare was an issue, but I was like, all right, well, we can find a way to do this by just shooting down a hallway and having Frank pop out. But if we didn't have Kel on there, the Morgan estate was a lot trickier because it just didn't flow. And if you're really having to move pieces around, or if your actors aren't, moving into rooms properly, it's going to mess with the pacing of the movie, because it's almost like a jump cut, and that's going to mess with a lot of things. It's going to confuse people, and it's just something, it doesn't look professional. So if your movie's not flowing right, it's just going to get that indie feel, and people are going to start to turn it off.
That's a great point. And the differences of the issues we had with the coverage, both was kind of a lack of coverage, but for the Morgan estate, it was critical in it flowing, which, at that point in time, it brings you out of it. Whereas in the Devil in the Room, it was more so add-ons to spice it up and make it a lot better. And I think really one of the issues with this one is we bit off a lot more than we could chew when it comes to like the special effects and those things. And also, I mean, even with the screenplay, if we look at the climax, we had the idea that she confronts Frank and she battles him, but we never had a set thing they did. We never had a set scare. We never had those things set. We're like, we're gonna wing it on set. And because of the timing issues, we winged it on the last day at like 3 a.m. So that's one of the issues that can come up when it comes to not having that solid screenplay, not having that solid climax. I think more than anything, people's critique of this movie is usually, man, that ending. We even get it in the reviews. People are just like, what was that? It just pittered out. And the sad part with that is it has a really good twist with the red lights at the end, but you're so disappointed in what happened that I feel like you just missed, and you're like, all right, whatever with that one. So, one thing we did start using, the mask, and we have Frank the Demon. Just a little touch on that. I end up doing a lot of the body acting stuff for it, and it was quite the ordeal just having that stuff on for like an hour. Like Frank the Demon, just putting it on. It had like arms as well too, and like I'll never forget, since there was a whole setup to do it. You'd be like, hey, let's get Frank on set. Let's get him going. So I'd get done with editing and I'd put my mask on. I'd put the contacts in. I'd put all these things to get ready to go. And then, we'd still be filming that same scene or whatnot. And I think to me, it's something where, no problem. That's just the life I got to live. I'll lay down on the couch and like almost pass out from like just sweating in it because I was waiting for it. But I think something to, think about is if you are putting people in weird get-ups like special effects or things like that, try and be extra sensitive in working around their time. Do you almost want to talk about like how you can improve set flow to keep morale up?
Yeah, I think it's big, especially for side actors, or like Kel was talking about with special effects people, or people who come in and are either like one and done. Making sure that you're bringing them on set at a proper time and making sure you're aware of their time is crucial. You don't want to have extra people on set. You don't want to have people waiting. But I think that just comes with the skill of like understanding how long things take. And it's like one thing I learned now through doing all this stuff was I have a good idea of how much time to allocate to a scene. Where in the beginning, we're like, we don't really know how long this is going to take. So it's impossible to schedule it. So we're like, all right, let's get the people here because we don't want to, start shooting this and not have those people. So I think you really have to, shoot a couple movies and really understand, how a set operates and how many shots you can get and how long these shots are going to take to get a better idea of, when to actually schedule and get people in. That being said, I don't think we've ever been like, oh, we finished early. We don't have the actual person on set. It's always been late. So just keep that in mind. For the most part, you're probably going to be running late as opposed to early. But you have to be, careful of people's time, especially if they're, working with you on a budget and, they're not getting paid a ton of money for their time and they're taking off of work. And especially if like it's running late, your productions are running late, and, you had told them that you'd wrap by like 1 a.m. and it's 5 a.m. They haven't even shot yet. It's not a good situation. So I think you have to be aware of that. And I feel like we've gotten a lot better since I started shooting the movies, because I could see how long it's going to take to set up, how long it's going to take to break down a set. And that's just getting the camera where it needs to go and getting the lights. And I think we've gone from like, it used to take us 30 to 45 minutes to get a camera set up and get the lights going. And honestly, now I could get that done in like 5 to 10 minutes. If that, I usually finish setting up before the actors are running through their lines or finish running through all their lines. But that's just, a skill from doing so many movies and understanding how everything works.
Exactly. And it's a lot easier to say than to actually execute on it, have your actors and everything ready. But it does make a huge difference. And again, it is something where even though I'm not going to break or anything like that on set, sitting there in Frank for 40 minutes and sweating on the couch when it was like, all right, finally time to go, Kellen. I was like, all right, let's just get this done. Like I was just like, let's just get it done. I'm gonna take this off, go back to editing. And things come up, things come up that delay the entire shoot, things that you can't know about. So it's always trying to do this, but really try and be as cautious as you can, and then try and learn as much as you possibly can from doing it too. Now, so we mentioned we did have a delay, and everyone that we work with is absolutely fantastic in the sense of we were able to get a finished product. However, the major delay for this one came from one of our actors just struggling a lot with the lines that they had. We're not going to say anything as specifics who it was, but this is something that's going to happen on set. It just naturally is. And I mean, they were really having issues with getting through the different scenes, and so much so that we basically had to work around them having this difficulty of getting through the lines. And here's what I will say: the finished product, they're typically probably ranked as one of the best performances we've had. So it is something where if you do run into the occasion of someone just really struggling through a scene, struggling through the lines, what is your approach to make this as easy and painless as possible? And I feel like this, really solidified the method that we have. We're like, okay, if we ever have this issue, now on set, we literally just say, don't worry about it. This is what we're going to do.
Yeah, I think you have to anticipate this situation because this wasn't the first time that this happened to us. It's multiple times actors will struggle with some dialogue, and they'll struggle with getting the lines out properly or in a good cadence or delivering the lines properly. But it comes back to pre-production. You want to make them feel comfortable in pre-production. As long as you're going through their lines in pre-production, you usually don't have an issue on set. The problem usually happens when, they flub a couple lines or they're not really getting into it. And then, I'm having to cut them multiple times, and then they start to get down on themselves, and then they start to get nervous. And then it becomes like a spiral of like their brain just starts to freeze and they can't relax. They're uptight, and it becomes very difficult for them to essentially finish out the scene. And this actor had a lot of heavy dialogue stuff, and it was a lot of technical stuff that we essentially made up. So it's very, very difficult to do this scene. I feel really bad because I shouldn't have put him in that position. But in the end, you have to just take a deep breath and try and get one sentence at a time. Because you can edit things and really move it around as long as you're doing cinematic, which goes back to like found footage is good. But man, you got to have actors that can nail those lines in found footage. In cinematic, get one line out of them, and then you could, paste it together in editing. You could change it around, especially if you have other characters and other cuts. And they can get a rhythm. You just want to try and get them out of their own heads and try and get them to just give you one line and go from there. And then they start to build momentum. They start to relax. They start to get comfortable, and they'll eventually get there. But I mean, you always have to just be aware of this. It's something that happens. This isn't the first time. It's not going to be the last time. You have to understand how to just, all right, take a deep breath, take a step back, and really just work with them on making sure they're comfortable. And I think honestly, what we learned from like our little side hustle filming business where we would film like chiropractors and doctors was you have these guys that are making, millions of dollars, and they would be all cocky about getting in front of the camera, and you turn the camera on them and these guys can't even say their own name. And so we're out there, we get, a minute commercial or 2 minutes of commercial time out of these guys in a couple hours, which is difficult. So you have to learn how to like work with them. And if you can get someone off the street who has no acting experience to relax and, take a deep breath and start, giving you a performance that you can use, actors are no problem. But I think you just really have to keep that in mind. It's going to happen. And when it does happen, take a deep breath and think of it as a learning experience and really try and work with the actor to get them comfortable. It's usually just a comfort thing. If they can relax and be comfortable, they'll be in better shape, because once they start getting in their own head, it's a death spiral and they only get more nervous and more frustrated. And they're just going to have more, like their brain's just going to lock up.
So, literally what we ended up doing is they would deliver one line, we would give them that line, they would deliver the next line, we would give them that line, they would get the next line, and so on and so forth. And I feel like a lot of indie directors or filmmakers might be like, you can't do this. Like, we got to do the whole thing. Like, I need that. You really don't in cinematic. If there's found footage, yes, you're in a completely different boat. But again, the way it worked and the way it flowed together. And I think had we embraced that compromise earlier, because again, they had a lot of, dialogue throughout this movie. And basically once we got in the groove and we're in the end of things, like near the end doing the final ones, it was pretty quick, and I think if you sit there and you go, okay, do the whole scene from the top. Okay, do the whole scene from the top. You really, like, even now when we have longer scenes, we basically tell the actors, forget about it, power through, we can cut back to it. So talk about, real quick, because I think that's important. How do we manage longer dialogue scenes now versus how we originally started? Where we cut earlier, where we power through? What's kind of the best way to approach just these scenes in general? Because again, time is money. How much do you do for retakes versus how much do you do to just move on?
Well, I think a lot of issues can be fixed once again in pre-production. Just if you're sitting down and reading with them in pre-production and they're struggling with lines or they're just not being able to get through a scene, then you could break it down. But the way I write my scripts now, it just comes back to understanding how to edit. I write the scripts so they're, in the favor of the actor and they're in the favor of the editor. So that's smaller chunks where they only need to say a couple lines, and then we have like either another character speaking or a cutaway point. So we don't have like 6 pages of just pure dialogue scenes. They're all broken up into little snippets that are easy for the actors to remember, and they're easy to for the editor to cut together. And you're just going to be able to really fix it or edit the movie how you want it to in post. And I think that's also one of the reasons that Devil in the Room suffered as opposed to the Morgan Estate. The Morgan Estate had a lot of dialogue dumps and it had a lot of boring dialogue, but we had the ability to cut that dialogue out. Where the Devil in the Room movie had a lot of dialogue, but we just weren't able to cut it out for various reasons. So we were able to kind of clean up the Morgan Estate, where this dialogue really wasn't, we weren't able to chop it down or just move it around like we were for the other movie. But that just comes back to, knowing how to edit. I frame the dialogue and the larger dialogue scenes now in the actor's favor, and I put them in a place to succeed for the editor as well, knowing, all right, look, this scene might be dangerous. Like, we might lose people on the scene. It's very long. So I'll make it, I'll break it down, and I'll be like, my editor head starts working. It's like, all right, well, if this is boring or this is slowing the pace down, here are the sections that I could actually cut to make this still make sense, but flow a lot better. So I think as a, screenwriter, you have to write dialogue in favor of your actors. And if you have editing experience, that only helps, because you could really, clean up a lot of dialogue issues and pacing issues in post-production.
Exactly. And having that mindset is really going to save you. And the hard part with that mindset is it just comes from experience. So again, whether it's a short, whether it's a feature, whether it's anything, just finishing a product is going to give you this experience that you have to understand moving forward. How do we set ourselves up for the best possible production, knowing that something is going to go wrong? And again, that ended up causing us to have delays. And we're like, all right, let's go ahead and let's push the production out there. Now, one thing I do want to also highlight is just something that we now have on set as a policy, which is we never delete anything. So on set, not only am I doing the editing, but I'm also doing the data management, which is a very important role. If you've listened to our past podcast, our first movie ended up disappearing for a little bit. So it is something that can easily happen on any set, especially if you're reusing cards. So now we basically don't delete anything. But in the process, we had a little bit of a scare. I remember feeling like my heart sank and I was like, how could I screw this up? Because basically, it's a very easy task to do. Move this here, put this in this folder, confirm, and done. Now, I knew I was doing that every single time. Same method, same methodology. The problem, this was now day 5 at 4 a.m. I'm running on about 4 hours of sleep and I'm really caffeinated. So even though you're just doing a very basic process, when you're that, sleep deprived and you're kind of going through it, it becomes really tricky. Now, what ended up happening was basically we moved some files over to take a look at them that I wasn't aware even happened. So when I was looking back through the files, they weren't there. We did ended up finding them, but it basically gave me a mini heart attack. So would you want to talk about how you really need to almost have these protocols in place, because they're not hard things, but again, this is tough shoot. Like, you're literally become a little bit delusional. So, what about the protocol? And then what about trying to set it up, understanding that your will and your mental capabilities start to deteriorate as you go on in the shoot?
Yeah, you have to definitely, first off, I would never delete anything. I think that's a good rule. The $150 or the $200 that you're going to save by just having other hard drives is not worth it. Just make sure you have enough drives so you can, safely put the files on the computer and on another drive. So you should have duplicate drives of everything and not have to delete. Our old method was we'd take like the cards out of the camera, put them in the reader, dump on the camera, then pull out the card and delete the card and put it back in the camera. Now we just have like 5 or 6 little 500 gigabyte flash drives, or not flash drives, but they're just like the Blackmagic drives. And we're actually going to add another piece of protocol to the next set, just because dumping all this data takes a long time. So there's actually a way that I've been looking into to dump this data on 2 different external or internal hard drives through like a data array, which will allow us to dump faster and also have a backup right away. But even then, I'm not going to delete that memory card because you never know what's going to happen. All it takes is someone to drop it. Or if your hard drive, we've had on the Girl in Cabin 13, one of our drives just stopped working. And if you delete, so if I would have taken that drive, formatted it for the camera, and Kel comes to me and says, this drive just stopped working, then we're done. We're screwed. So making sure you have proper data management, the extra couple $100 is just completely worth it, because if you lose, like if we would have lost the scenes in this movie, we wouldn't have a movie. It wouldn't have been able to be made. So it's just looking at things that could really, really screw you. And this is one of them. As far as, understanding, it's not only the actors that work on a bell curve, it's myself as well. The first day I'm nervous. I'm all hyped up on adrenaline. My direction is not as good. I'm not in the flow. My shots, because I'm the DP, aren't as good as they are later on in the movie. But then also towards the end of the movie, I start to get tired. Like, there's just times where I just can't properly problem solve. There's times where my shots are just going a little bit off, or I can't think clearly how I want to get coverage. And the actors are asking me for feedback, and I'm just like, oh man, like I'm having a hard time here. And so at that point, you just got to take a break, get some water, get some more caffeine, and just go. But it just comes back to, you really want, like, day 2, 3, and 4, the intro and the climax to be done, and try and finish on the easier stuff so that both you and the actors, as you're going down that bell curve, you have easier stuff to shoot. And once again, that'll work better for morale, because if you're faced with a time crunch and the director doesn't know what he's doing because he's getting tired, he's getting mental fatigue, that's not good at all, because you should always be the driving force of your production. You should always be the one working harder than everyone else. You should be up first, go to bed last. And if you're struggling, or, your brain's just not working as sharply as it could, the confidence in the production will go down, and you're going to start to have a lot of issues very quickly with not only yourself, but the actors.
It's tough. It really is. It's a grind. And until you've experienced it yourself, you're really not going to be able to fully understand it. And, it takes a lot of discipline, takes a lot of focus, takes a lot of mental fortitude from everyone, including yourself. So those are always things to look into. And then one thing on the memory, there's just such a great feeling of knowing that no matter what, yeah, you have multiple copies. Even every single time I would delete something, at least 4 times I would check it just to be like, am I sure? Okay, it's here. Am I sure? Yes, it's here. Okay, I'm sure. Because I would put it on one external hard drive, then another external hard drive, and then delete it. So we would always have at least 2 copies. But now that we have 3 copies, it's great. Because it's just like, it's not there, it's on that card. And if it's not there, it's on that one, or it's on that one. And even now it's like, now I have a tower with all of it. He has one. So just really, there's no reason not to play safe with it. It's such a smaller investment in the grand scheme of things. And it really, just the peace of mind, is worth any of those extra expenses. So, overall, I would say it was a solid shoot. I think coming off of it, we did know the pickups, but let's kind of wrap this up with, talking about what was your overall feelings on it. I think we did run into the crunch, and we did admit, well, this kind of slowed us down, having to adapt and understand, hey, you compromise this with the dialogue when there's issues for different actors. But how are you feeling overall when it came to this production?
I feel really good. I think this was probably top 3 as far as my feeling of, we have something really cool here. When I drove off set, we weren't rushed. I knew that the finale would need pickups, but we have a house out there, and I knew Kel could be frank. And from learning from how we dealt with the Morgan estate, I felt comfortable that we can get all that stuff. So I was like, all right, I think we have everything we need to make a cool movie here. I thought the performances were great. I thought that we had tried to fix a lot of the sound and technical issues that had plagued the Morgan estate. So, driving away from this one, I was like, all right, I think we finally have a pretty good cinematic movie here. I felt comfortable with it. I felt good, that my spirits were high after this one. I just felt good. I felt like this is a very good shoot. And usually when you come off a shoot and you have everything, you feel really good, because you're like, all right, that was 7 days of just absolute hell, but I got everything. So it's a much different feeling than, oh, well, that was 7 days and that was hell, but I'm missing a lot of stuff and I don't know how to fix it. So anytime you leave set and you know that you have enough footage, or you have the opportunity to get the pickups to get enough footage, your mind's in a good spot. And I felt good with everything on this production. It was just once we started to go through the editing that we realized we might be in a little bit of trouble.
And we're going to go ahead and hop right into that trouble on the next episode, part 3 of the podcast, basically what we did for the pickups. So again, if you guys are enjoying this, we do have multiple other channels, such as our YouTube page. We also have our TikTok, our Instagram. Most importantly, we have our Discord channel where you can become a super fan. And our super fans are going to be able to see The Haunting of the Murder House, one of the newest films that we have way before anyone else, because we're going to get their direct feedback. So again, guys, be sure to check us out online. But until then, have a good one.